Well, that's a rather interesting position coming from a man on a crusade against the evils of technology.
I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.
Armor of Truth. Live.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel and log on armoroftruth.net.
Greetings, everybody. It's Armor of Truth Live, number 196. Welcome. Yes, it is the middle of the night. For those of you who are tuning in live, which probably won't be very many of you, we are on late on a Saturday evening. And for those of you who may be wondering, the reason for that is we have some issues going on with our family now. We're having to take care of some family members. So this is the best time to do our show at the moment. So since 98, 99% of you watch this show on replay, hopefully this won't be too much of a problem. So let's get started. With what we have for you tonight is one of the deepest dives we've been able to put together on the issue of what effect is the internet having on the church. Of course we know God is sovereign. It's not like he didn't see the internet coming. But what are the people? What is fallen humanity doing with the fruits of God's common grace? His common graces, one of those being the internet. So tonight we're going to look at an article from BaptistNews.com, a recent article where the title of the article is "Online Religion Isn't Luring Millennials Away from In-Person Church." So we're going to look at the thesis of that article, and it makes some good points. And we've also, Trinity Radio, Jonathan Pritchett did a response to this article. I'll play a clip from that as well to help set us up, because what we want to do is show you that there is a far more relevant question that we need to be asking. In the article, basically it says faith leaders shouldn't worry too much about the growing availability of online religious content and activities. They shouldn't be worried that that's going to lure millennials away from houses of worship. And the study shows that, in fact, it's not luring anyone away. But what we want to show you is that there is a much more relevant question that isn't being addressed about online religious content. So, and its effect. So we'll look at that. Is there a new kind of religion being formed on the internet? What are some of the statistics that help us to make our case? And a history of online religious content. How did it start? If anyone was alive, if any of you watching, probably this audience, most of you were around at the beginning of the internet. We're going to go back to 1995 and 1996 and show you a couple articles, one from Time Magazine, another one comes from Wired.com. 1995, that article, about technopaganism. Who is it, folks? Ultimately, let's just get down to brass tacks. Who is it that sets the algorithms, Who is it that creates this structure from which online religious content is fed to the viewer? On YouTube, for example, when you tune in and watch videos, when a video stops, whatever video comes up next, unless you have a playlist going, is going to be something that YouTube suggests to you. That requires an algorithm to do that, to determine, hey, what have you watched in the past? What do we think you like? Well, who is it that actually builds those algorithms, forms them? And what kind of control do they have over what is fed to a person? What kind of content is fed to a person? The point is this. Sure, you can find sound doctrine on the internet. You can find that. But right alongside it sits all kinds of strange doctrine. So we want to show you the history. Let's show you a couple. Let's show you a couple of these. Let's run you through what we've got for you tonight. I'm going to show you some statistics here, but this too, we're going to look back into the 1990s and the beginning of this whole deal. What was it like, the first religious sites? And we'll give you a little bit of history of how did, here's the first virtual congregation from 1926. The first virtual congregation. Right? Congregation that did not meet in person. Yeah, 1926, Father Charles Coughlin. We'll talk about that. Led into the televangelism years. And then we're going to show you what it is we're here to talk about tonight, which is this. Technopaganism. Here's the problem, folks. You can find good, sound doctrine on the internet. There's no question about that. But when you're on the internet, that is not your realm. Somebody has created it. Somebody has set it up a certain way. And we're going to show you. I'm going to show you the origins of this whole thing and help you to understand why it is that you need to be careful. Church leaders. This is a call ultimately to leaders in the church. You have to be paying attention to what's going on online. You have to know what's available, what kind of religious content is available out there for your members, for your flock to consume. So let's jump right into that. And we'll start off with this Baptist News article. Jeff Brumley. So he says, on the contrary, right, it's online religious content is not pulling anyone away from the church. That's what they say. On the contrary, it says in some cases, online religious content enhances the in-person religious experience for participating Americans and Canadians. The study that he's using here was from Sarah Wilkins LaFlamme from a paper titled Digital Religion Among U.S. and Canadian Millennial Adults. So it's her research, which polled Americans and Canadians between the ages of 18 and 35. She says, we know that more and more people are turning toward digital mediums for spirituality, such as chat groups with pastors, online sermons, and religious content on social media. We found that while digital religion isn't necessarily attracting a lot of new millennials to participate, it is making the experience of those already involved richer. Okay, these are true statements, right? Online religious content, in some cases, is enhancing the in-person experience for those who are already members in the faith. It's not attracting a lot of new people to the church, the study shows, but it's not pulling anybody away. So in that sense, as Jonathan Pritchett said in his coverage of this topic, that's good to know. It's good to know that at least out here, from the statistics anyway, it doesn't seem to be that we're causing anyone to leave the church. And if you're watching this channel for any time at all, you know that one of the core, at the core of our message is you need to be involved. You need to be tethered to your local body of believers. It's not a time for you to be a free agent, not in this world. Her study distinguishes between millennials who consume online religious content and those who actively post spiritual topics to certain various platforms. So this was a 12-month period where subjects were asked to describe their involvement in either consuming or posting content like this. 36% said they don't do it at all. 53% said they didn't post spiritual views to sites like Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, and Facebook. The point there is that far more people are consuming rather than posting. So there's a lot more of you that watch this than there are people like me who produce this, which seems obvious, right? But there's a far greater prevalence of digital religious practice among Americans compared to Canadians. So in America, we're far more likely to just get our religion, our practice online. We're far more likely. 64% in the U.S. Claim that this is how they get their religious experience is online. So the difference corresponds to declines in religious adherence documented in previous research. And we've talked about that here before too, right? This right here. From about 1938 until 1999, those who said they were a member of a local church in the United States stayed in the 70s. They didn't fall below 70% for that whole time. But then in the last 20 years, look at that drop. And that's what's showing up in a lot of this research. So church leaders, you need to be aware of this. You need to be aware of this because there's something that this research is missing. As rates of more conventional religious practices such as in-person religious service attendance have fallen in more recent years among younger generations, the expansion of the internet in our lives has meant that a larger proportion of millennials are coming into somewhat regular contact with religion and spirituality online. And what are they consuming? How is it determined what they're actually watching? We have a question to ask about this that we believe is much more relevant. And we'll ask it as soon as we get through this article. There's a correlation between those who participate in at least monthly digital faith activities and those who are more likely to attend in-person religious services and other events. So what they're saying here is there are only 5% of you out there who, now it's among the age group, polled for sure. But there's only 5% of these respondents who only do monthly or more frequent religious or spiritual digital content consumption without also attending religious services. Just to summarize that, it's only 5% of the millennials, or those who were polled, who are saying that they only get their religious experience, their spirituality, from the internet. Now, that's a small number, but I'm here to tell you that I think that number is a lot larger than that, and I think that is a demographic that's very important. The people who are out there, who we've been talking to for a long time now, people who have gotten angry at us for reminding them over and over, if you're forsaking the gathering, you're missing the point. If you don't think that church is, the local church is important, then you don't understand what the New Testament is even about. That's what the New Testament is. It's the foundation of the church. And Paul's pastoral letters, it's all about 1 Timothy, Titus, it's all about the formation of the local church, how to lead it, how to do worship in it, what's acceptable and what's not. So their research said that's only 5%, but I would say, Jesus gave us this parable You've got 100 sheep, 99 are with you and one is lost. What do you do? What do you do with that one sheep that's lost? Do we just forget about this 5% who are only getting their religious content online? They're only getting their spiritual, their worship online. So Jesus told a story, as he did many times in order to explain spiritual truths. If a man owns 100 sheep, what do you think? If one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he is happier about that one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. Now, what does that tell you about how important the seeker is to God? How important the unsaved is to God? In the same way your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should perish, Matthew 18. The people of Jesus' day understood the relationship between shepherds and sheep, but the significance of a shepherd going in search of one lost sheep is sometimes lost on us, right? Why would you worry about this small portion? It's only 5%. Seems strange that a shepherd would leave his flock to search for one missing sheep. You might consider the shepherd leaving the 99 to find the one this way. A father and his 5 children are asleep in their home when the fire alarm goes off. The smoke detectors are buzzing. Father awakens to find his house filled with smoke and the sounds of flames, crackling timber, rooms, hallways filled with smoke. Panicked, he races to his children's bedrooms and begins to rouse them, calling to some and carrying others. He stumbles down the stairs and out the front door, sets the sleepy children on the grass a safe distance away. Then he turns, gasping for air, squints through the smoke to count the kids and realizes there's one missing. The youngest, the most vulnerable, is missing. What's this father going to do? What are you going to do? God is a father, and he counts his kids. He rejoices that some are safely in Christ, prepared for eternity and nestled near his heart, but some are missing. The Father sent Jesus on a rescue mission to seek and to save the lost. God does not abandon the 99. They're already safe in his kingdom, attended to by his angels and guided by his Holy Spirit. That's Romans 8, Hebrews 13. But God's heart aches for those that are not yet in the fold. So the Good Shepherd pursues the lost sheep. And that's our message here tonight. It's a call to church leadership, to leaders in the church, apologists everywhere out there. There's a segment of the population that I think you guys are overlooking. As a whole, 25% of millennial respondents in the U.S. and Canada said they participate in less conventional religious practices at least monthly, with 11% including a digital component. Another 25% pair these frequent, less conventional religious and spiritual activities with monthly or more frequent religious service attendance, among whom almost all include a digital component. Also examined were the influence of religious tradition. It just says here that Protestants are more likely than Catholics to consume online religion or spirituality. By contrast, Protestants are 14 percentage points less likely than Catholics to post on social media about religion or spirituality. But presence at in-person religious services was found to influence participation in these activities. So it says here, to summarize this article from Jeff Blumley at Baptist News Global, BaptistNews.com, this is my headline, should church leaders be worried? says adult religious service attendance and unchurched spiritual activities also have a greater impact on this more active form of digital religion. Living and experiencing religious and spiritual activities in person seems to make a young adult much more likely to post about them on social media. So, to summarize this report, basically they're saying that there's not enough, there's no kind of spiritual revolution to speak of where you see millennials choosing to forego the church and only do their worship online. Digital religion does have its followers and is one set of available options competing, in a sense, with many other secular ones for the time and attention of young adults today. Now, that's what we want to focus on. What are those options? Okay, that's great news. It doesn't seem that online content is pulling anybody out of the church in big numbers. But the question is not, is the internet luring people away from in-person church? I don't think that's the right question. The question should be, of all the people consuming online religious content, what authority do they submit to? Does that matter? Is that important at all? Who do they submit to? Is anyone discipling these people? What standard do they use? What actual worldview do they have? Just because someone attends church, that's no guarantee of anything, right? What worldview are they actually working from when they consume this content? Because I'm going to show you in just a minute that it's a minefield out there. And if you don't have a firm foundation, you're going to be pulled away. Any wind of doctrine is going to blow you all over the place, especially if you're in a church who's not paying attention to any of this and you're not being discipled. So the internet is a global mission field where alongside good, edifying, sound doctrine, there's plenty of that to find. We think you can find that right here. But this is no substitute. This is not a substitute for your church attendance. But right alongside that sound doctrine or truth sits technopaganism, for example, and all kinds of alternate, untrue versions of Christianity. So if the believer is not faithfully practicing submission, I know that really irks people when you say that out loud, but if you're not faithfully practicing submission to the authority of a faithful local body, then the likelihood of you or someone in your position embracing strange doctrine becomes much greater. In other words, what is the standard of truth by which this online content is being filtered? If the local church fails or neglects to recognize all of the options that are available to its members, to the people that they're responsible for, if the local church fails to prepare the hearts and minds of those under their authority, then confusion is more likely than ever. So let's look at this a little more closely now. As I said earlier, we're going to look at the history of religion on the internet, all the way back to the mid-90s here in just a moment. But another article from Jeff Brumley at Baptist News, more about millennials, saying that millennials want sound doctrine. You know, they're going to leave your church if your church culture conflicts with the gospel. Now, that sounds good. Boy, we hope that's true. It says for years now, churches have been trying to solve the millennial puzzle. It's one with a lot of pieces, also known as Generation Y. People born between roughly 1980 and 2000 are known for questioning authority. They're known for distrusting institutions and an aversion to organized religion. Congregations have tried just about everything to lure young people to church or to keep them from leaving, incorporating modern music, being less formal in worship, and having youth-oriented small groups. These are a few ways they've tried to attract the younger crowd. But the Pew Research Center has reported that millennials are rapidly driving up the number of nones, the unchurched, those without religious affiliation. What's the church doing wrong? While many of those young people were raised in non-religious homes, others are abandoning their childhood faith altogether, or at least leaving organized faith far behind. Why? Why? Which one is true? Those who jettison faith, or who never had it, are less likely to re-embrace religion later in their life. Here's my point. It goes on to say here that millennials and other young people are expert at sniffing out hypocrisy. I would ask, okay, if that's true, do we think that millennials and other young people are expert at sniffing out hypocrisy in themselves? Right? It's one thing to be able to see it out there. It's another thing to know it's in here. Churches must be certain that the way people treat each other before and after worship is keeping with the gospel being preached. Certainly wouldn't disagree with that. Now, hey, Blumley here interviewed a young man, a millennial. Let's see, his name is Breaky. He's got a website. He's a millennial. He's 31 years old, and he said it isn't gimmicks but honesty that's needed to heal the growing rift between young people at the church. He says that millennials, this is a millennial speaking, and millennials appreciate frankness. He suggests that you have conversations with millennials. Find out what they like. As long as we're having those discussions, he says we're headed in the right direction. Is that so? He says, Breaky says, you can say everything right, but if your church has a culture of fear or judgment or of shunning people, if they don't look around, if they don't look or sound a certain way, then that's not a healthy place. I'm not so sure that what Breaky's saying here is a good thing. On one hand, it sounds right. Your church, you need to back up what you preach from the pulpit, right? But we'll be the ones who decide if you're doing that, right? Millennials are expert at sniffing out hypocrisy, but maybe not so expert in sniffing it out in themselves. He says, make sure that things you believe and say to be true match the culture being created. Of course. But for the Christian, according to the whole counsel of God, the first step is to check yourself. Ask God to show you your sin first, rather than trying to find it all out here. That means taking a hard look inward before launching programs and ministries designed to attract or keep millennials. So, once again, what have we seen here? Over this period of time where the church has been so interested or so focused on attracting millennials with whatever it might be, Romans 1 tells us that the gospel is the power. The gospel is the power and salvation for all those who would believe. The gospel is the power that changes hearts and minds, and then it can change homes, families, it can change towns and cities, regions, states, nations. Ultimately, if you're post-millennial, it'll change the world. One heart at a time. But is there a new religion forming on the internet? First of all, let's look at a couple of these. This is why we think this is important. These are comments that we've received at our channel over the past, year or so on this topic. Here's a stat for you. By the way, 61% of Christians believe in New Age ideas. That's Pew Research. That means that they have some kind of, people who also say they're Christians are also holding some kind of New Age idea like reincarnation, or they're denying the Trinity. God is just a force of some kind, or manifesting your reality. Christians, 61% of Christians believe in these kinds of ideas. See, we've got a bigger problem here. What we can see, what do you think has coincided over this period of time, 1999 to 2020, the past 20 years? There you go. It's the rise of the internet. Rise of the internet. Causation is not correlation, but that sure is evidence. It's evidence that can't be denied. So we have to be aware of what's going on out there. So another comment that we received on this channel was this one. One of our viewers said, hey, called us, took us to task for the things we say here. You don't need church. All you need is God. Interesting. It's not what God said. Jeffrey says, if you think a real Christian should join with a Freemason, same-sex marrying, narcissistic, mask-wearing, no-good, sin-pampering 2022 church, then I think you're nuts. I agree with you. I don't think you should join a church like that either. Says, I wish it weren't so, but it's time to come out from the worldly church and enter the spiritual church. What is that? What is that? Steve says, all the churches today preach the prosperity gospel. All of the churches, he says. No doubt. Just about all of them that are on television do, but, says Joyce Meyer, Paula White, Joel Osteen, Benny Hinn, and all the rest. This is not the Word of God, says Steve. Says the churches today are so watered down, Jesus said to come out of her. So you see the theme. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of confusion out there about what is true Christianity? What is the true church? You see, this 5% that the Baptist News article, the Sarah Wilkins LaFlamme research, that 5% that they say only get their spirituality online, I think it's a lot larger. I think it's bigger than that. I think it's bigger than that because we hear from these people all the time. But what about this? Is there a new religion forming on the internet? What about Evelyn Juarez? We've talked about her here before. First of all, TikTok has 1 billion users. 1 billion. 1 billion users. That's with a B. So if you're a leader in a church and you're not aware of what's going on here, well, your congregation is. Evelyn Juarez is a 25-year-old living in Dallas, typical TikToker, except for the fact that she's got 1.4 million viewers and influences a lot of young people, probably a lot of young people at your church. Many of her videos reveal an interest in true crime and conspiracy theories. Her beliefs are reminiscent of many others on the internet. People who speak of bad vibes, demonic spirits, or a cosmic calamity looming just over the horizon. One that the government may be trying to keep secret. Juarez says that she was raised Christian, but at age 19 she began to have a more personal relationship with God outside of organized religion. Today she identifies more as spiritual. An increasing number of young people do. Many of them working out their ideas in real time online. They may talk about manifesting their dreams. Some might act almost like prophets or shamans, spreading the good word and guiding prospective believers, while others may just lurk in the comments. But part of the draw of internet spirituality is that it's perfectly pick and choosable. It's customizable. But more than anything, they believe in the importance of keeping an open mind to whatever else might be out there. Is it a good idea to keep an open mind? We've heard that all our lives, right? Hey man, just keep an open mind. What's the matter with you? You some kind of bigot? Keep an open mind. Mind's not designed to be open, to be left open. Eventually that mind needs to close down and lock down on something true. Joseph Russo, a professor of anthropology at Wesleyan University, was asked if this loosely related web of beliefs could ever come together to form its own kind of religion. This professor of anthropology here says, I think it already has. Consider the widespread mainstreaming of astrology over the past decade. The renewed interest in holistic medicine, things like that, especially astrology. Huge, huge on YouTube, huge on TikTok. Listen, occultism, paganism is huge on here. These are all frameworks of belief that question traditional logic and institutional thought. 2020 was the first year on record that the majority of Americans said they did not belong to a church, synagogue, or mosque. Now, this is the research we were just telling you about. This came up in this article. This research right here. From the 1930s to the turn of the 21st century, around 70% of Americans did belong to a church. Americans, particularly younger ones, increasingly report they have no religious preference, or as some have put it, it's the rise of the nuns, the N-O-N-E-S. The religion of the internet poses questions excuse me, like, what's the harm in believing? Let's see, where did I've lost it. Why shouldn't I be prepared for the worst? The deeper you go, the harder those questions are to answer. But the idea online religion is, well, you could perfect yourself somehow. You could perfect your health. You could perfect your circumstances. Economics professor at the University of the West of England, Bristol, who studies neoliberalism and religion, Mary Wren, said it was the idea that you could perfect yourself. This eventually culminated in the prosperity gospel, known best for its charismatic leaders preaching financial wealth and good health. If you're not healthy, it's because your faith isn't strong enough. And the widespread practice of manifesting, or the idea that in order to make positive things happen in your life, all you have to do is pretend that they're already there. Because it's preached virtually, the message travels much further. It's a lot easier to have believers when you don't have to be physically present in the church. It's the portability of the message. That's what makes people believers in something like the prosperity gospel, even when they're not necessarily regular churchgoers. The same can be said for the internet, where spiritual trends proliferate much like cultural and political ones. As social media has become the dominant cultural force in our society, ideologies are spreading between people who have vastly different beliefs and backgrounds, but who show up on each other's feeds and relate in new ways. It's a mishmash of different Christian and non-Western beliefs and aesthetics. But this stuff, good and evil, prosperity, are present in all religious systems worldwide and always have been, says the writer of the article here. Even our most fervent atheists or agnostics are still interested in morality. Same idea, just different packaging. But these binaries espoused by internet spirituality, good and evil, demonic and angelic, abundance and poverty, are reinforced everywhere in culture, and not only in the context of religion. Even the demonic. The demonic is one of those distinctions that really has a lot to do with who's your customer. Who are you trying to frighten? It works on people not necessarily because they've read the Bible, but because they've watched Harry Potter or they played Dungeons and Dragons. But Evelyn Juarez the popular TikToker, says she was raised in a religious household, but her beliefs differ from her parents in that she feels less connected to the ideas taught by the church. She just feels more connected to Jesus himself. She says, I've noticed, this is a quote, I've noticed a lot of the younger generation looking for God in a different way. They move away from the religious background and have an actual relationship with God, she says. So this is the idea, and it's far greater than 5%. The comment section below Evelyn Warren's TikTok videos is proof in itself. People say things like, yeah, I can relate to this. I can relate to this more than what I've been taught, because it feels right. Her approach to spirituality echoes many beliefs common in certain sects of Christianity. Also, Abby Richards, a 25-year-old disinformation researcher, whatever that is, who creates TikToks about how conspiracy theories spread online. Talk about that later. She says, there's a collective sense that the world is ending, whether it's climate change, whether it's the rapture, the return of Jesus, wealth inequality, satanic worship, or whether people's vibrations are too low. She says it's the only nonpartisan issue. Well, when enormous swaths of people feel as though they have no power against evil doing, she argues, they tend to opt into narratives that provide a simple answer as to why the world is so terrifying. Yeah, so the problem of evil is a huge one today, being able to explain theodicy. If there is the issue of theodicy, another point that we have to be able to address, as the church needs to be able to address this among these people out here, because, look, we have competition, lots of competition. So we have to be able to explain to people why it is that evil exists in this world and God exists and is good. Main reason people can't get that whole concept right is because their anthropology is wrong. They don't know who they are. They give themselves far more credit than they deserve. They don't understand they're fallen creatures. The internet offers endless answers to these kinds of questions, partly because of how the internet functions. For instance, TikTok. It facilitates a pipeline for viewers that begins the moment they log on. It starts tracking every move they make. And it starts bringing back to them more and more content relating to something that they've already watched in the past. But because of how short TikTok videos are, it's the fastest growing social media platform in the world right now. And that's because the videos are just seconds long. Time is limited to 3 minutes, but they're often much shorter than that. Viewers can consume hundreds of videos in the same time span as they could watch a single YouTube video. Right? So the time you've been here watching this for the past 40 minutes, and you could have watched 1,000 TikToks. And that, over on TikTok, is where there is a huge Christianese movement. Now, if you're talking, if you're talking sound doctrine over there, if you're telling the truth about homosexuality, things like that, you're not going to be allowed to speak freely over there. But if you've got the message that Evelyn Juarez here has, if you've got that Christian message, well, you'll have 1.4 million subscribers. But it works because the message is portable. Over here on TikTok, the videos are so short. The speed at which an idea travels correlates to its simplification. And the message is very simple over on TikTok. Now let's look at, for a second, some real information, some real data about what's going on, actually going on in the church. First of all, about this research, let's Let's define our terms. When we say Christians in this research, we're talking about self-identified Christians of all denominations, but we're not talking about cults. We're not talking about Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses. If that offends you, if you're someone who is a Mormon or Jehovah's Witness, listen, we care about you, we love you, we want you to hear. We want you to hear the truth, but that's not Christianity. It's unbiblical. So this is not including Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses. So practicing Christians are people who identify as Christian. They say that faith is very important in their lives and attend church. They've attended church in the past month. All right, so we've got Christians, people who identify as Christians. Maybe they don't attend church. And then we've got practicing Christians, folks that are tethered to a local body of believers. And then we've got this title here, non-practicing Christians, self-identified Christians who do not qualify as practicing. In other words, they do not qualify according to the Bible as Christians, but they call themselves Christians. We've got some interesting categories here. And then, of course, we have non-Christians. So just so we know who we're talking about, a non-practicing Christian is the one we're going to be focused on here. These are people who identify themselves as followers of Christ, the kind of person who will say to you, you don't need, like Thomas, you don't need church, all you need is God, or something like these confused statements that we saw here earlier. That would be perhaps a non-practicing Christian. It's fairly common out here on YouTube, especially in the thing called the truth movement. People who identify as Christians but are not practicing. And by practicing, we mean, look, if you're going to participate in the sacraments, if you're going to follow Jesus' command of breaking the bread and having the wine, if you're going to follow that regularly, then you have to be with a body of believers to do it. Yes, I know, split hairs if you want to. Yes, you can take communion other ways. I know that. But listen, if you're trying that hard to get out of getting up on Sunday morning, well, look, man, you've got other problems. You've got other problems, all right? So Christianity in the United States has undergone dramatic change in the last few decades. That's clear. We've pointed that out over and over. Data collected among over 96,000 surveys over more than 20 years gives us some powerful insight into the changes happening in terms of faith practice, church attendance, Bible reading, and prayer. And those are the ones we're going to look at. Church attendance, Bible reading, and prayer. Key markers of religiosity have diminished overall. And this statistic, or this chart here you're looking at on your screen, I'll describe that to you in a second. Some signs of steadiness among committed Christians do stand in contrast, but currently just 1 in 4 Americans is a practicing Christian. So we got 3 segments we're talking about: practicing Christians, non-practicing Christians, and those who are not Christians at all. Now, let's look at this piece here. Practicing Christians are now a much smaller segment of the entire population. In 2000, 45% of all those sampled qualified as practicing Christians. 45%. Remember what it was in 1938? It was 70%. 70% all the way up until about 1999. I mean, it dropped fast. It seemed to have dropped in about a year. Now that is out of those who are qualified as practicing Christians. Those who are, said specifically here, practicing Christians are those who have attended church, at least in the past month. This number has consistently declined over the last 19 years. Now just 1 in 4 Americans is a practicing Christian, right? 45% to 25%, 20 years. In essence, the share of practicing Christians has nearly dropped in half since 2000. You can see this on your screen here. The red line is practicing Christians. Look at how it's dropped since I've got since 2009 here. I cut this graph off a little bit. It went all the way back to 1999, but I cut it off so it'd be big enough for us to look at here. But you can see, still gives us the idea here. As you can see, the practicing Christian drops all the way down to 25% from 2009 to 2020. At the same time, what's on the rise? Non-practicing Christians. Those who feel they can just get it all online. Where did they go? It says here in the article. Data indicate that their shift was evenly split. Half of them fell away from consistent faith engagement, essentially becoming non-practicing Christians. Half of the people who were considered practicing Christians in 1999, or let's see here, 2009, supposedly fell away. Half of them fell away from consistent faith engagement, essentially becoming non-practicing Christians, while the other half moved into the non-Christian segment. This shift also contributed to the growth of the atheist, agnostic, and non-segment, which has nearly doubled in size during the same amount of time. So you can see that in the yellow category here. All right. 1/3 fewer Americans attend church weekly now than they did in 1993. So it's a shifting religious landscape. And we can see that that's even more clear when you just look at church attendance. Now we have, that is one topic we've beaten over and over around here. So I think what we've said so far on this is quite sufficient to make a case that there's a big problem in the thinking of people who call themselves Christians today. In actual numbers, 36% fewer Americans attended church weekly in 2020 than in 1993. This change could be correlated to a number of reasons, including the growing number of Gen Z and Millennials making up the U.S. population. Could be about disputes about who gets to be a part of or lead in the church. Right? Could be about whether female pastors are allowed or whatever. It could be about past and current church scandals. Right? People could be turned off because so-and-so had an affair or whatever. And it could be perceptions of the church's role in politics, right? That's been a big one over the past 5 or 6 years, past decade. And when you look at church attendance by generation, let's not get it twisted. It's not just millennials. It's the whole group. The whole group. I think I've got a stat here that shows you that later, but even those who are classified as boomers, everybody's fallen away. But one thing that's interesting here about this whole period of time is that consistency of Bible reading has seemed to remain steady for nearly a decade. But let's look. Is that true? So this is a Barna poll that we're looking at here. Partnered with the American Bible Society to gain even more robust understanding of America's relationship with the Bible. This graph visualizes, let's give you full screen on that. This graph visualizes the results from 4 separate years of that time series. The graph could easily be divided into those on the right side, indicating infrequent Bible reading, and those on the left side who read their Bible much more frequently. The share of Americans who read the Bible at least several times a week has not changed significantly from 2011. However, there is a more dramatic shift among those who have never read a Bible, jumping a full 10 percentage points in the last 8 years. Look at that. You see what's happening here, folks. The internet is taking the place of religious practice. People don't read the Bible anymore because they can just listen to other people talk about it online. When looking at the trend line among those who read their Bible weekly, the overall message is clear. Those committed to the spiritual practice of Bible reading have stayed just as committed, while those who never made this a consistent part of their lives are now more likely to never open a Bible. So look at that. Look at 2019. Now this is, as you go down here, this is from 99 to 2019. It's not a good sign. What about prayer? From 1996 to 2020. Taking all these changes into account, the decline of practicing Christians, the decline of church attendance and prayer. Barna's tracking data on these important measures of faith. Engagement reveals some concerning trends about the vitality of faith in America. We do see here that individuals are much more likely to say a prayer than they are to attend church service. Now, you might think that's encouraging. There's a problem with that, folks. There's a problem with that. And that problem is, as we said right at the top, what authority? What standard? How do you know that your prayer is sufficient? Where do you get your doctrine? Where do you get your teaching about prayer? It's understandable as this faith practice is far more accessible, right? It's easy to say that I pray all the time. No one can actually see whether I'm doing that or not. People could say that. And it's easier to do. You don't have to do anything but just do it. You don't have to get out of the bed in the morning on Sunday. You just do it. But how do you pray? How do you pray? How do you know how to pray? How do you know what to pray? How do you know if your prayer is consistent with the will of God? How do you know this? Where do you get that teaching from? What standard? Even as religious affiliation and institutions have declined in favor of culture, we have a culture that remains open to spirituality. So you see, it's not that the United States, that adults are not open to spirituality. It's just that now they have far more options. Over the last 10 years, however, there's been a steady, slow decline with just under 7 in 10 Americans affirming that they pray weekly. So, this is where we are. Let's talk about now where it started. Let's talk about the history. This is going to be the fun part of the show because we're going to look back into time. We're going to look at history of basically the internet, but religion on the internet. By the way, thank you for those who are here and watching this live tonight, here in the middle of the night. Thank you for being with us and watching. If you happen to be here watching, just hit that thumbs up, hit that like. That helps us out quite a bit here. And we'll make this comment while we're here at this little break. We receive emails now since our comments are closed, and we don't have a live chat right now. We may return to that in the future, but let me make a comment about that right now. Let me tell you, I had a little statement prepared for this because I want to make sure that folks understand why it is that we don't have our comment section open or a live chat anymore. Online communities can be a good thing. They can even be edifying. But folks, let's get one thing straight. YouTube is not a real community. In fact, nothing that you find online is a real community. Can it be edifying? Can it be that? Are there good aspects to it? Of course, yes. The internet is a tool. It's a tool, but it is not a replacement. And YouTube is not a real community. The danger here of YouTube channels and YouTube personalities, and the danger of this is that it becomes about me. It becomes about the What's going on the channel today? What's up with, let's follow this person. It becomes about the person. Folks, if you've been given a platform and you're here on YouTube or somewhere, you can hit the button. You can get 100 people watching. You can get 1,000 people watching. If you know that when you produce content on YouTube that 50,000 people, 60,000, 100,000 people are going to watch it, do you feel an urge? Do you feel any push, any sense of urgency that your message be centered? Not just centered, that your message is founded on Christ, that the gospel is present always. God came into the world as man, Jesus Christ. The Word became flesh. He came into the world and He lived a life and He preached this message that we talk about here. That message is that you are a fallen creature. You are at odds with God. You are a rebel. You're a rebel to God. You've broken all His laws. And it's not just that you've broken them by doing them, you even think them. That's what Jesus came to fulfill the law. Now it's in our mind. Now when we think, now when we get angry, we're guilty of murder. So nobody can keep that law. We've all broken it. So how do we get right? How do we get right with a just and holy and wrathful God? It's only through Christ. It's only through Jesus Christ. It's only through His death, His atoning death on the cross, and His rising from the dead in victory over sin and death. It's only through Christ. It's only through submission to Christ. So if you've got a platform and you've got eyes watching you, you've got that many people watching you, and you don't feel some sense of urgency that every time I'm here on this, that it's about Jesus Christ, that it's about the gospel. It doesn't have to be every minute, but it has to be present. If God is giving you this opportunity, He can take it away. But if He's given you this opportunity, then we ought to be exalting Christ every chance we get while we can, because one day YouTube's not going to allow you to talk about Jesus Christ. You'll be able to talk about Jesus, but you can't say He's the only way. Can't say that homosexuality is a sin. Well, it's just like others. You can't say things like that. Sooner or later, you're not going to be able to say that. So while we have the chance, don't miss that opportunity. And if you have a big platform and you don't feel that sense of urgency, then test your faith. As Apostle Paul said, test yourself. Test yourself to see that you're in the faith. It's a good thing to do. It's a healthy thing to do. But we want to let you know this, that the danger of YouTube channels, blog forums, is that they can enable a person. Now, this is a point that Summer made last week to me that hit me like a ton of bricks. I said, this is the point. This is what we need to tell people. We're not here to enable you or anyone else to start thinking that this is your church, to start thinking that I'm your pastor. That's not me. That's not what I do. I'm not qualified. I don't do that. That's the highest calling that there is in the world. And you need to be under the authority of one of those men. I'm not him. But what these YouTube channels can do, when there's a personality and there's a crowd, there's a group that forms around it, they all start, meeting up in the live chat. And we saw it happen here several weeks ago where a wife got hammered by quite a few people because we decided to talk about flat earth, I guess. Decided to tell people that they're acting like they're in a cult. And that's what happens. That's what happens, especially with topics like the Mandela effect or flat earth or whatever, or alternate versions of Christianity. People become cult-like. In fact, we've made the case here that there is a new kind of cult. It's a hyper-real cult. It's where people they form cults of one. They belong, they're in a cult, but they never see the other people. They never actually see the other cult members face to face. But they all think alike, and they all join up in little cliques together online, and if you challenge them, that's how you know they're in a cult, the way they respond, because they react with anger and ridicule. So I've gone on longer than I wanted to about this, but let's just make it clear. The most important activities of the Christian gathering cannot be duplicated or even found anywhere within online communities or in private, personal, singular faith and study. We all need this. Now, this private study, we all need our quiet prayer time with Christ, but it's, and as we said earlier, this, you can find edifying, sound doctrine on YouTube. You can find that. But it's more important than ever that followers of Christ and those who are experiencing the call into the faith, experiencing God's drawing them to Christ, must seek out the local church. It's not optional. Not if you've got a new heart and you live in the United States where you can find a place to worship. There are people all around the world. There are people in other parts of the world who are literally dying, being killed for their faith because they choose not to forsake or denounce Christ when asked by whoever it might be. And we here find every excuse we can think of to just not be involved with the local church. That's the church that Christ gave us. He bought it with his blood. But we're too busy. We're too busy. We're just, my personal faith, my own faith. That's all I need is Jesus and my Bible, right? What did Jesus say about it? To forsake the local church is to forsake the Lord Jesus Christ's own commands and exhortations in the Gospels, and to ignore major theme and purpose of the New Testament, which is the establishment and building up of the local church. So these YouTube communities, they make it easier for people to seek out what they want to hear and to listen to only the voices that support their rebellion. So YouTube is not a real community. For those of you who are wondering why we shut down our community, YouTube is not a community. And for now, I'm glad that we've shut that down, because I guess we didn't even realize that it was happening. That we're not here to build a YouTube community. We're here to preach Christ and him crucified, and that's the point. That's it. We're not here to make a little YouTube community. We definitely, though, want to offer edifying content for Christians and those who want to know more about Jesus Christ. That's all it is. That's all this is for. Nothing else. In that vein, let me mention 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy, where early in chapter 1, where the Apostle Paul tells young Timothy, he reminds him, he says, as I urged you upon my departure from Macedonia, he tells Timothy, you stay on here at Ephesus. Timothy, stay on here at Ephesus so that you can instruct certain men not to teach strange doctrine, and to not pay attention to myths and endless genealogies. Myths and endless genealogies. What are those? What are those myths and endless genealogies? That's what the Apostle Paul is telling Timothy. Nothing has changed, my friends. We've got it today more than ever. That's what the internet, that's what it is. What is it that the Apostle Paul is warning Timothy about? But then he comes back in the next verse and he says, but the goal of our instruction is love. From a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith. Why? Because some of these men, some of these people have strayed away from these things. From love, from a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith. They've strayed away from these things and have turned aside to fruitless discussion. This is the Apostle Paul talking to Timothy in the first century. He's telling him that some of these men have strayed away from the truth and they've turned aside to fruitless discussions. Wanting to be teachers of the law. Even though they do not understand either what they're talking about or the matters about which they make confident assertions. Now, that's not Brad talking. I'm not just saying that. That's the Apostle Paul preparing Timothy for the false teachers and the false doctrine that was present in the church of Ephesus right there in the first century. Timothy's charge here is to correct the influence of false teaching. Timothy's charge here is to clean up the church. And so if our leaders are not aware of all of the options that are available here on the internet, then they're missing out on something that is crucial. So let's look at the history of religion online. This is going to be a fun dive for you. Does anybody remember that? Anybody have America Online back in the day? Remember when you thought getting on the internet was logging into your AOL account? Like schools, like businesses, like governments, everyone, it seems, religious groups are rushing online. Now, folks, this is a Time magazine article from December of 1996. Time magazine from December of 1996. So this is right when the internet was just really starting to catch on. And this is what they're saying, like schools and businesses and governments, like nearly everyone, it seems, religious groups are rushing online, setting up church homepages, broadcasting dogma, and establishing theological news groups, bulletin boards, and chat rooms. Let's listen to what Time magazine had to say about what they thought was going to come, what was going to happen to religious content on the internet. Listen to what they say about it. It says, almost overnight, the electronic community of the internet has come to resemble a high-speed spiritual bazaar. right. Everything's available. It's a buffet. What kind of Christian do you want to be? Thousands of the faithful and equal numbers of the faithless meet and debate and swap ideas about things many of us had long since stopped discussing in public, like our faith and religious beliefs. It's an astonishing act of technological and intellectual mainstreaming that is changing the character of the internet and could even change our ideas about God. The signs of online religious activity are everywhere. Listen, this is good. If you instruct Alta Vista, a powerful internet search engine, anybody remember Alta Vista? Probably almost none of you remember Alta Vista, 1996. Anyway, if you use that search engine to scour the web, this is pre-Google, folks, to scour the web for references to Microsoft's Bill Gates, the program turns up an impressive 25,000 references. But ask it to look for web pages that mention God and you'll get 410,000 hits. Now, that was a big number back then. That's nothing now. But that was huge back then. Look for Christ online, on the web, and you'll find him. 146,000 times the name Christ comes up. News groups like Alt-Fan, Jesus Christ, and Alt.Religion.Scientology are among the busiest and most contentious of the nearly 20,000 discussion groups carried on Usenet. America Online and CompuServe, the two largest commercial online services, are each home to hundreds of electronic bulletin boards that offer everything from Confucian primers to Q&As about Jewish dietary laws. The harvest is even more bountiful on the web. When you go outside of America Online. That's what that meant back then. Where everyone from Lutherans to Tibetan Buddhists now has a homepage. Many crammed with technological bells and whistles. Mormon sites offer links to vast genealogical databases. Remember? Endless genealogies. We just read. While the Yalave Yavo, an Orthodox Jewish site, forwards email prayers to Jerusalem, where they are affixed to the Western Wall. 2 websites are devoted to Caldaism, the tiny Vietnamese sect that worships French novelist Victor Hugo as a saint. And a handful probe the mysteries of Jainism and Indian religion, in which, as one learns on the net, the truly faithful sweep the ground with a small broom to avoid accidentally stepping on insects or other helpless creatures. Even the famously technophobic Amish are represented online by a website run by Ohio State University. It offers, among other things, a guide for installing a rear warning light on a horse-drawn carriage. Perhaps the most ambitious site on the web is one now being patiently cobbled together on the first floor of the Vatican's Apostolic Palace. First launched in 1995, running 24 hours a day on 3 powerful computers nicknamed Raphael, Michael, and Gabriel, or Raphael, Michael, and Gabriel. The internet is exploding, and the church, this is a quote from someone from the Pope's office, said the internet is exploding and the church has got to be there, says Sister Judith Zobeline, the American-born nun who runs the website. She says the Holy Father wanted it. Indeed, the Pope, now this was not Francis, this was not Benedict, this was Pope John Paul II. Says, indeed, the Pope was writing as early as 1989 about the opportunities offered by computer telecommunications to fulfill the church's mission, which he called the new evangelization. The faithful, according to a recent study, another Barna poll. Now, this is interesting because this article from 1996 references the same Barna research that we just shared with you, telling us exactly what happened over the last 20 years, 30 years. This article's referencing it back 30 years ago. The faithful, according to a recent study by Barna Research in Glendale, California, are moving online every bit as fast as the rest of the world. Barna concluded that churches that don't establish a presence in cyberspace will start to seem badly out of touch with their parishioners. It sends an important signal about the church's ability to advise people in an era of technological growth. In this area, the faithful seem to be leading their churches. Not the leaders of the churches, but the people. It is the nature of computer networks. They tend to throw together people who would otherwise never meet. Now, that's a good thing in general, right? I'm not saying that's bad. Thus, on the internet, Catholics suddenly find themselves keyboard to keyboard with devil worshippers. Jews modem to modem with Islamic fundamentalists. This quote says, I put the Reverend Moon's Unification Church right up there with the wonderful world of Mormon. Someone with the screen name Marzioli posted recently on a Usenet group. And then right under that comment, someone fired back and said, Mars, You're an ignorant disinformationist. Wake up, man. 1996. Has anything changed? These chat rooms and bulletin boards draw scores of believers hunting for new ways to understand their old religions. For fundamentalists, prohibited from openly discussing social issues such as homosexuality and abortion, that makes you a fundamentalist. In 1996, still today, if you have a firm stance on homosexuality and abortion, you're a fundamentalist. Okay, color me fundamental. That's fine. They said the net has become the best and sometimes the only way to get exposed to a wide range of religious opinion. Is that always a good thing? Is it always a good thing for everyone to have access to a wide range of religious opinion? I mean, people who aren't under any, don't sit under the authority of any pastor or aren't being led or taught or discipled at all. Is it a good thing? Alvin Plantinga, a philosophy professor at Notre Dame, very noted apologist these days, says these electronic exchanges will ultimately help people from many religions understand the common ideas that bind them together. Rachel Ganucci, an Arab, not Rachel, it's Rakhed Ganucci, an Arab philosopher from North Africa, argues that it is imperative that the inhabitants of the small networked village the world has become find a way to understand one another. Otherwise, he says, we're all doomed to annihilation. Well, some truth in that. Is it possible that this global network that pulls in so many different directions could somehow bind us together in a way that other technologies, particularly television, have failed to do? TV seems to have lured people away from their communities. Could it be that the net is starting to bring them back together? Can it create new communities of spiritual consensus in virtual space? Just as urbanization brought people together for worship in cities and ultimately led to the construction of larger and larger cathedrals, so the electronic gathering of millions of faithful could someday lead to online entities that might be thought of as cyber churches. So in 1996, they're already seeing that you're going to have people who, you're going to have whole churches that only exist online. A controversial bishop named Jacques Gelot has established what he calls a virtual diocese. He marvels at the freedom he enjoys loosed from the hierarchy of the church. He marvels. He says on the internet there is no question of someone imposing rules on the way people communicate. You see, the human heart is lawless. By our nature, we're lawless. We don't love the law. We don't love God's law. He says the internet has no center from which will can be applied. So it's a free-for-all. And that's a sentiment echoed in the United States by something called post-denominational Protestantism, a religious movement that links thousands of U.S. churches in informal networks outside the boundaries of mainline Protestant or evangelical denominations. The churches fill their services with rock and roll, recovery counseling, and a non-judgmental approach to a wide range of lifestyles. This is 1996. Making increasing use of computer communication technologies, there's definitely a congruence between these technologies and the outlook of these churches. Even the holy texts. Remember this? Anybody remember Ask Jeeves? Even the holy texts have begun to be adapted to the new technology. These hypertexts open up thousands of interpretations of God's words to anyone curious enough to click a mouse. For all its seeming newness, however, the marriage between technology and religion is an ancient one. Now, this is going to be an interesting part for you here. Now, as we look back into history, and how have Christians used technology through history? Someone may tune in here and think, well, listen to this Christian guy. He's just going to sit here and talk down about technology. Let's explain this right now. How should a Christian think about technology? Well, in biblical terms, right? But the Bible doesn't talk about how we should deal with technology. Well, the Bible does tell us how to think about wealth or mammon or worldly gain. God makes it all possible. So if we want to think about technology, how should the Christian think about technology? How to use it? How do we go about it? Is it all just satanic? No, of course not. There is no maverick molecule. God is in control of it all. This is God's internet, right? So how do we think about technology? Think of it like wealth. The love of money. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So think about the internet in terms of wealth. It's a tool, but it's no replacement. It's no replacement for the real thing. "5,000 years ago, the Sumerians etched their fears and hopes in cuneiform on cylinder seals. Centuries later, we have some pictures of some cylinder seals we've showed you here before. Centuries later, the Egyptians glorified Ra on papyrus scrolls. Old Testament documents found at Qumran also on papyrus scrolls. The Old Testament was hewed and edited in the 1st century AD when the scrolls were turned into primitive books called codices or codex. These first codices had another equally historic impact. They gave upstart Christianity an edge over Roman paganism. So the point is this. Someone might say, well, these Christians hate technology. They're against technology. Not at all. Scientific revolution comes to you courtesy of Christianity. And listen to this point about Roman paganism and Christians. While pagan scholars stuck with their scrolls, like modern Luddites refusing to embrace email, these early Christians leaped at the efficiencies and portability of books. The result was a technological advantage for early Christianity. But it was too much for the Roman emperors, who quickly developed their own innovation, the burning of books. So the point here is, folks, the scientific elite, secular scientific elite, or not only secular, it could be religious in some way, it could be pagan. The scientific elite, here, they're the ones destroying technology, not the Christians. It's not the Christians. Early believers spent much of the next 1,000 years obsessively copying and recopying their sacred text. It was a brutally inefficient process, as cloistered monks toiled for years in musty scriptoriums, transcribing copy after copy of the Bible into leather-bound books. This medieval copy system, Xerox system, was painfully low-tech, as a monk would slowly copy at the rate sometimes of 1 page a day. As these elaborate Bibles circulated in Europe, a single copy would cost more than a peasant's lifetime earnings. They spread more than the Word of God. They also set new technological standards. Georgetown professor Martin Irvine calls this manuscript culture the first information age. And right here, the Gutenberg Press is going to be playing an important role in that. He explains it was the first time a whole civilization configured around a standard technology for the recording and distributing of information. So as we reach here far and firmly into the internet age, the information age now, it's not new. There is a precedent for this. The first technology, the books, the codex, was the first technology for recording and distributing information. The first information age. The mid-1400s, a German inventor named Johann Gutenberg wheeled his movable type press out of his secret hiding place and into history. The first book Gutenberg printed was the Bible. His simple press passed sheets of paper under specialized plates that could be changed in minutes instead of weeks. Ideas that once could be communicated only in person or at large universities and cities suddenly took wing, flew across oceans, across continents. And though Gutenberg printed only 200 Bibles before he lost the rights to his press, lost control of his invention, he never really got to see any of the massive fruits of his labor on this. It's a sad story, but not for the Bible. It's a man that the Lord still used in a great way. There was no turning back. In 1456, when the first Bible rolled off his press, there were fewer than 30,000 books in Europe. Now listen to this. We're talking about this internet and how there's never been anything like it. But listen, in 1456, or roughly that time, there were fewer than 30,000 books in Europe. In 50 years' time, there would be 9 million. And most of those books were devoted to religious themes. So the point is this. What did you think the internet was going to be about? It's going to be religious. It's going to have a religious theme. What is that religious theme? Mostly, we'll show you in just a bit mostly what it is. Well, many scholars credit the printing press with theology's next revolution, the Protestant Reformation. 37 years after Gutenberg's death, young Martin Luther renounced his plans to become a lawyer. He joined the monastery of the Emerites of St. Augustine. In a decade's time, he turned against the institution that he had vowed to serve and created one of history's greatest religious splinter groups. This is how the article describes it anyway. Rome wanted to suppress his ideas. The Roman Catholic Church wanted to suppress his ideas, but Luther quickly found that the printing press could be used as a sort of technological megaphone. Printing copies of his 95 theses faster than they could be gathered up and destroyed. So, to drive the spread of the gospel continues into the modern era. By 1926, 14 years after Edwin Armstrong cranked up his first receiver, the good word was streaming from American radio stations, first shocking and then energizing what was then a still devoutly conservative country. Father Charles Coughlin, a firecracker Catholic priest who pounded a broadcast pulpit from Detroit, built a virtual congregation in just 4 years. For tens of millions of Depression-era believers, his Shrine of the Little Flower was a beacon of hope, until an embarrassed church pulled the plug. And though there was plenty of anti-Semitism and isolationism and fear-mongering in his message, there was little irony. Even as he used all this blessed new technology, he still damned the capitalist economy that produced it. So, with every technological revolution comes new opportunities for sound doctrine and plenty of opportunities for strange doctrine, for error. How do we guard against it? the 1950s. A new generation of media-savvy ministers, Bishop Fulton Sheen, Billy Graham, Oral Roberts. How about that for a threesome? That's 3 different guys started directing their crusades at TV audiences. TV evangelicals preached not just about the miracle of Jesus, but also about the blessing of communications technology. Religion and TV became so indistinguishable that it took a neologism to fully capture what was going on. And that new word was televangelism. Televangelism. And now we stand at the start of a new movement. And it's, this is 96. We're not at the start of this movement now, but this is interesting to hear from the perspective of 1996. Looking back into history, as history, it's telling us what's going to happen. How's it all going to look? You know, at the time this article was written, they didn't know how this was all going to play out, but they sure had a good idea, as you can see. This delicate dance of technology and faith, the marriage of God and the global computer networks. There's no sure way to measure how much the internet will change our lives. But the most basic truth about technological revolutions is that they change everything they touch. Just as the first telescopes forever altered our sense of where we sit in the cosmos, so the internet may press and tug at our most closely held beliefs. Will the internet change religion? They're asking from 1996. Is it possible that God in a networked age will look somehow different? Scholars are still struggling to answer that question or even make sense of it. Most traditional religious thinkers are skeptical. Again, Alvin Plantinga says, I don't think the computer revolution has any cosmic implications for religion at all. He says we already know God. But for a whole culture of technology-loving, and in some cases perhaps technology-worshipping futurists, such words smack of first millennium thinking in the face of third millennium faith. They tend to see in the internet something larger than themselves, an entity so much greater than the sum of its parts as to inspire awe and wonder. People see the internet as a new metaphor for God, says Sherry Turkle, a professor of the sociology of science at MIT. The internet, she says, exists in a world of its own, distinct from earthly reality. It's supernatural. That's the point that they'll make over and over, folks, is that the internet is seen as a supernatural force. Crafted by humans, but now growing out of human control. She says, quote, God created a set of conditions from which life would emerge. Really? God created that life. So this is going to be you're going to hear a little evolution here. Let's say, like it or not, the internet is one of the most dramatic examples of something that is self-organized. That's the point. God is the distributed, decentralized system. So that's interesting to hear here that they're writing this in 1996. This is bad theology, right? God is sovereign. The internet is like the Gutenberg press, etc. It's why didn't God bring around the Bible in Abraham's time, or the Gutenberg press in Abraham's time? Well, God is sovereign, and if you look at how the Gutenberg press came along at a time when, at the right time, at the only time that it could have been so effective, and the internet, the same thing. It seems as though the net itself has become conscious, says William Gibson, science fiction writer who coined the term cyberspace and used it most famously in his 1984 novel, Neuromancer. He says it may regard itself as God, the internet, and it may be God on its own terms. Gibson hastens to add, however, that he's carefully ambivalent about whether anything that exists solely on the internet actually applies to the real world. So that's an interesting comment there, because it's suggesting that the internet really is hyper-reality. It's more real than real. These radical notions dovetail with a spiritual movement known as process theology, whose proponents argue that God is evolving along with man. In their mind, the immutable God embraced by scholars like Plantinga make no more sense today than an unchanging computer operating system. William Grassi, a Quaker professor of religion at Temple University, says if God doesn't change, we're in danger of losing God. I just have to ask, what Bible does he read? My Bible says that God doesn't change. But he says if God doesn't change, we're going to lose him. He says there's a shift to the idea of God as a process evolving with us. If you believe in an eternal, unchanging God, you're going to be in trouble. Okay, let's rewind. There is a shift to the idea of God as a process evolving with us. That's what this current internet is doing. The quote also says, if you believe in an eternal, unchanging God, you'll be in trouble. Interesting, right? From 1996. As much as the net is changing our ideas of God, it may be changing us even more. It's a vast cathedral of the mind, a place where faith can be shaped and defined by a collective spirit. Such a faith relies not on great external forces to change the world, but on what ordinary people, working as one, can create on this World Wide Web that binds all of us, Christian, Jew, and Muslim, and Buddhist, together, interconnected. We may begin to find God in places we never imagined. And now that is the foundation for where we're going here for the last few minutes of our show with you. Technopaganism, folks. Who is it that has actually created this environment? Who has created this environment from which Christians are now being served religious content? And is it important? Do we think it's important that religious leaders be aware of what I'm about to tell you here, what I'm about to show you? Now, that was a 1996 article. Let's go back one year earlier to 1995. In 1995, an article for Wired magazine, Eric Davis, covers pagans and the internet culture, interviewing Mark Pesce, creator of VMRL, and a technopagan from San Francisco. Davis writes, long driven to hypermedia environments, the MIT dropout Mark Pesce has now designed a way to perceptualize the internet by transforming the web into a three-dimensional realm navigable by our budding virtual bodies. Pesce is also a technopagan, a participant in a small but vital subculture of digital savants who keep one foot in the emerging technosphere and one foot in the wild and woolly world of paganism. Several decades old, paganism is an anarchic, earthy, celebratory, spiritual movement that attempts to reboot the magic myths and gods of Europe's pre-Christian people. Both cyberspace and magical space are purely manifest in the imagination, Pesce says. He says technopagans honor technology as part of the circle of human life, a life that for pagans is already divine. Pagans refuse to draw sharp boundaries between the sacred and the profane, and their religion is a frank celebration of the total flux of experience. Sex, death, comic books, compilers. A passionate attempt to influence the course of our digital future and human evolution. He says computers are simply mirrors. There's nothing in them that we didn't put there. Interesting. There's nothing in them that we didn't put there. I think computers can be as sacred as we are because they can embody our communication with each other and with entities. And with the entities, he says. He defines the entities as the divine parts of ourselves that we invoke when we're in that space. So you hear the idea here. Technopagans are the ones who have created this medium. They're the ones, Google, Facebook, Zuckerberg, these are technopagans. They're the ones that control this environment. We got to be aware of that. We need to be aware of that, and we need to know how that affects all of us as we come into this realm to consume content or to create it as we're doing it here. He says magic will play a key role in combating the virulent information memes and pathological virtual worlds that will plague the coming cyber world. Yeah, so I want to share with you some from this article from 1996. From Wired magazine. It's called Technopagans. Without the sacred, there is no differentiation in space. If we are about to enter cyberspace, the first thing we have to do is plant the divine in it. Okay, this is from 1995, from the very people who were creating this medium that we're using today. So, Mark Pesce here, of course, read William Gibson's breathtaking description of cyberspace as a call to arms. And he spent the last handful of years bringing Neuromancer's consensual hallucination to life, concocting network technologies, inventing virtual reality gadgets, tweaking the World Wide Web. Long driven to hypermedia environments, the MIT dropout has now designed a way to perceptualize the internet. That is to be in it, to be within it, by transforming the web into a three-dimensional realm navigable by our budding virtual bodies. So let's read a little bit from this article to find out, in 1995, as this internet was really taking shape, the people who were founding it, the people who were designing it, who are they? Who were they? What was their worldview? And is there any effect, does that have any effect on us today? A startling number of pagans work and play in technical fields as system operators, computer programmers, and network engineers. On the surface, technopagans like Pesce embody quite a contradiction. They are Dionysian nature worshippers who embrace the Apollonian artifice of logical machines. But pagans are also magic users, and they know that the Western magical tradition has more to give a wired world than the occasional product name or the background material for yet another hack-and-slash game. Magic is the science of the imagination, the art of engineering consciousness and discovering the virtual forces that connect the body, mind, with the physical world. And technopagans suspect that these occult old ways can provide some handy tools and tactics in our dizzying digital environment of intelligent agents, visual databases, and online muds and moves. There's a term we need. The muds and moves. I wrote that down here. We're going to see that over and over here, that term. So a MUD, an MUD, it's a multi-user dimension. You know, it's what Meta is today. What Facebook has become in Meta, that's what they're talking about. It's a place where people can interact in cyberspace. He says both cyberspace and magical space are purely manifest in the imagination. Both spaces are entirely constructed by your thoughts and beliefs, he says. In a sense, humanity has always lived within imaginative interfaces, at least from the moment the first Paleolithic grunt looked at a mountain or a beast and saw God peering back. Over the millennia, alchemists, Kabbalists, and esoteric Christians developed a rich storehouse of mental tools, visual data spaces, and virtual maps. It's no accident that these Hermetic arts are named for Hermes, the Greek trickster god of messages and information. One clearly relevant Hermetic technique is the art of memory, first used by ancient orators and rediscovered by magicians and Jesuits during the Renaissance. In this mnemonic technique, you construct a clearly defined building within your imagination and then place information behind an array of colorful symbolic icons. By then walking through your interior world, you can recover a storehouse of knowledge. Goes on to say the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus gives perhaps the most famous Hermetic maxim, as above, so below. According to the ancient Egyptian notion, the cosmos is a vast and resonating web. A vast and resonating web of living, symbolic correspondences between humans and earth and heaven. And as Pesce points out, this maxim also points to a dynamite way to manipulate data space. You can manipulate a whole bunch of things with one symbol, dragging in a whole idea with one icon. So the article goes on to explain how Pesce and other people that are associated with him here essentially they are practicing occultists, and that they use what they know from ritual. They use what they know from Kabbalism and Western esotericism to form what we know now as the internet. Why does the operating system Windows? Why does it work the way it works? It could have been a lot of other ways. Someone had to think of a way to design this so it would work a certain way. But why this way? Why all these symbolic representations? Well, it's reasonable for one thing. It's better to have a symbol represent a lot of ideas rather than to have a separate symbol for all the individual ideas. You can't represent all those at one time. So you need one symbol to represent a lot of things. That part of it makes sense, but listen to a little more of this. He says, Pesce now spreads the word of cyberspace in conference halls and boardrooms across the land. His evangelical zeal is no accident, because he was raised a hardcore Catholic and infected briefly with the mighty Pentecostal Christian meme in his early 20s. Pesce has long known the Gnostic fire of passionate belief. But after moving to San Francisco from New England, the contradictions between Christian fundamentalism and his homosexuality became overwhelming. At the same time, odd synchronicities kept popping up in ways that Pesce could not explain rationally. So, walking down the street one day, he just stopped in his tracks and said, quote, I thought, okay, I'm going to stop fighting it. I'm a witch. So that's what he says. And if you think about Burning Man, that's This is Burning Man. This is the whole idea. This is the spirit that pervades the internet. For Pesci, the craft is nothing less than applied cybernetics. It's understanding how the information flow works in human beings, in the world around them, and then learning enough about that flow that you can start to move in it and move it as well. Now he's trying to move that flow online. Without the sacred, there is no differentiation in space. Everything is flat and gray. If we're about to enter cyberspace, first thing we have to do is plant the divine in it. So it's very clear that those who are responsible for creating this space most certainly had a religious background. There was a religious purpose about it. Witchcraft evolved into the art of advertising. In ancient times, they didn't have TV. The venue was the ritual occurrence. 8 times a year, people would go to the top of the hill, to the festival spot, and there would be a party. They'd drink, dance in rings, and sing rhyming couplets. Today's pagans attempt to recover that deep seasonal rhythm in the midst of a society that yokes all phenomena to the manipulative control of man. It's about harmonizing the tides of time, the emergent patterns of nature. It's all about learning how to surf, he says. In 1985, when National Public Radio reporter and witch Margot Adler was revising Drawing Down the Moon, her great social history of American paganism, she surveyed the pagan community and discovered that an amazingly high percentage of folks drew their paychecks from technical fields, from the computer industry. Convenience and superstition alone do not explain the powerful resonance between hermetic magic and communications technology, a resonance that we find in history, not just in science fiction. Even if magic is only a metaphor, then we must remember how metaphoric computers have become. Everything on the internet is a metaphor, right? It's hyper-real. While visualization techniques use hypothetical models and colorful imagery to squeeze information from raw data, and what is simulation but a metaphor so sharp we forget it's not a metaphor. Technopagans, for all their new age kitsch and bohemian brouhaha, are taking the spiritual potential of this postmodern fusion seriously. As virtual reality designer Brenda Laurel put it in an email interview, she said, "Pagan spirituality on the net combines the decentralizing force that characterizes the current stage in human development by the revitalizing power of spiritual practice and the evolutionary potential of technology. Revitalizing our use of technology through spiritual practice is an excellent way to create more of those evolutionary contexts and to unleash the alchemical power of it all." For the last piece here, he says, combing through esoteric mailing lists in 1995 and Usenet groups, I kept encountering someone called Tyagi Nagasiva and his voluminous, sharp, contentious posts on everything from Sufism to Satanism. So the writer of the article here, Eric Davis, comes in contact with this Tyagi guy. This Tyagi guy makes a quote. He says, by the way, this Tyagi fellow, a techno-pagan who's also very much involved in the formation of the internet as we know it now. He says, "For a long time, I had the desire to find the truth at all costs or die trying. After reading and deeply researching philosophy, mysticism, and the occult, Tyagi began cobbling together his own mystic structures, divination systems, and rituals, an eclectic spirituality well suited to the net's culture of complex interconnection. He also delved heavily into chaos magic, a development on the occult fringe that's well represented on the net, which is just something that chaos magic is, rather than work with traditional occult systems, chaos magicians either construct their own rules or throw them all out together, spontaneously enacting rituals that break through fixed mental categories and evoke unknown, often terrifying entities and experiences. Tyagi says, using popular media is an important aspect of chaos magic. Instead of rejecting media, like many pagans, we use the media as magical tools. Most pagans would get online and say, let's get together somewhere and do a ritual. But chaos magicians, the people who formed the internet, say, let's do the ritual online. Cyberspace is a different dimension of interaction. There's a window between the person who's typing and the person who finds himself in cyberspace. If you're familiar enough with the tool, you can project yourself into that realm. Within the physical world, there are certain subsets that are called MUDs, or multi-user dimensions. It's like a book. A book is a kind of multi-user dimension. You can get into it and move around. It's a place to wander. So MUDs become a powerful metaphor to see in a personal sense how we interact with different messages. He says, real life is the fusion of various multi-user dimensions. It's where all of them intersect. And then Eric Davis, the author, goes on to talk to a lady called Legba, another programmer, another technopagan occultist who's responsible for developing the internet that we know today. He asks her, do we bring our bodies to cyberspace? How is this possible, I ask. Is it imagination? Is it the astral plane? Is it the Word made flesh? Legba responds by saying it's more like flesh made Word. Man become God. Like many of the truly creative pagans I've met, says Eric Davis, Legba is solitary, working without a coven or close ties to paganism's boisterous community. Legba's a pretty traditional witch. Legba says, I was sort of born this way. There was always this voice that I always heard and followed. Like many, Legba enjoys swapping genders and bodies and exploring net sex. Enjoys swapping genders and bodies. One of the characteristics of shamans in many cultures is that they're between genders or doubly gendered. And another aspect of the real world, the false dichotomy, is to think that cyberspace and our real life bodies are really separate. That the astral is somewhere else, refined and better. Interesting. This article goes on. It's a long one, and that's probably enough to have made the point that we wanted to make. There's several other pieces. There's some scholarly articles that I had that I was going to share with you, but we've probably covered this enough. We can come back to this later. In an article called Digital Media When God Becomes Everybody, the Blurring of the Sacred and Profane, it reads, so far we've seen digital media as sacred, mysterious, set apart, or digital media as profane, daily and mundane. How can this tension be held? How can digital media be both profane and sacred? The answer is simple. It is both, because we, a hyper-modern society, have sanctified the profane. The argument goes back to processes of secularization and even before. The Enlightenment movement in Europe. As religious institutions and beliefs were becoming weaker, a new ideology has taken their place, that of science and technology. Once God could no longer save humanity, a new savior was called upon, that of medicine, trains, machines, and computers. According to David Noble, the religion of technology is deeply rooted in Christian theology, which bridged the human and the divine. Technology is meant to take us out of our worldly worries and into an otherworldly state of being. As Noble puts it, 1,000 years in the making, the religion of technology has become the common enchantment. The expectation of ultimate salvation through technology, whatever the immediate human and social cost, has become the unspoken orthodoxy. Regardless of when this type of thing began, maybe as early as when humans had tools, the idea that technology is here to save or damn us has been articulated by scholars and theologians before. That type of argument, however, makes technology wholly sacred, and we have seen that technology has clearly profane uses. The argument, therefore, is taking us a step forward. It's not that technology has replaced God. It's that we, the human, have replaced him. Oppenheimer, in his famous quote, proclaimed, "Now I'm become death, the destroyer of worlds," citing a God from the Bhagavad Gita. Put simply, Oppenheimer touched on a notion in modernity that humans now have the powerful tools of the gods. It's not the tool that is wholly sacred, though. It's the man that takes on godlike powers. That the human is the new God is probably a process that can be traced back to the humanist movement, with its focus on human importance rather than the divine. One might think of Friedrich Nietzsche's work or his writings on the Übermensch. In both cases, to be human fully is a divine state. Ecce Homo is especially interesting because in it, Nietzsche describes mundane and profane human behaviors. Like drinking tea instead of coffee, or writing well, as of the utmost importance, as rituals, maybe even as divine actions. In a sense, Nietzsche is here sacralizing the human. This type of thinking conceptualizes technology not as a tool that will lead humanity to some otherworldly salvation, but rather as a tool that reflects here and now in its wholeness. Hypermodern thinking seeks no other world because we realized there's nowhere else to go. So there you go. The worldview of those who've created this realm for us to use is that there is no other world to go to, that this is it. Ultimately, it's a spirituality that comes out of atheism, but technopaganism is the fundamental worldview behind of those who have created this internet that we're all using. We have to be aware of that. It doesn't mean we stop using it. Ultimately, God is sovereign. He's in control. But it's important for us. It's important for us to know who we are, have a proper anthropology about ourselves, and to know about this realm where we go to receive all of our information. As we started out today, the question was, does online religious content lure people away from the church? The answer to that survey was no, not really. But we've decided that there is a much more important question. What authority, by what standard are people who consume online religious content, by what standard are they filtering that content? If they are Christians, are they under someone's authority? Are they being discipled? How do they know to filter what they see? Ultimately, it comes down to the knowledge of the holy. A.W. Tozer, in chapter 1 of his book, The Knowledge of the Holy, Why We Must Think Rightly About God, says, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. The history of mankind will probably show that no people group has ever risen above its religion, and man's spiritual history will positively demonstrate that no religion has ever been greater than its idea of God. Worship is pure or base as the worshiper entertains high or low thoughts of God. The most ominously significant fact about any man is not what he may say or do, but what he assumes and accepts God to be like deep in his heart. By our nature or instinct, our mental image of God influences the way we live our lives and how we view humanity and the world. This is true of the individual as well as the community or nation, and it's the same for the church. The most revealing thing about a body of believers is their idea of God. What the church is saying is important, but what the church is not saying, or necessary cultural trends with which leaders are avoiding confrontation, often says far more about the state of the church. The church can never escape the self-disclosure of her witness concerning God. A rightly scriptural concept of God is essential to the faith and practice of the Christian. What comes into mind when you think about God? We can predict with certainty the spiritual future of any person if we could glean a complete answer to that question. Likewise, knowing exactly how religious leaders answer this question today will foretell for us the health of the church tomorrow. All errors in doctrine or failures in applying a biblical Christian ethic can be traced back to corruption in theology. Or wrong anthropology is also a major factor. A.W. Tozer said, "It is my opinion that the Christian conception of God current in these years of the 20th century is so decadent as to be utterly beneath the dignity of the Most High God, and actually to constitute for professed believers something amounting to a moral calamity." The modern man is greatly burdened in his soul. There is one mighty single burden of eternity that presses down upon all human creatures with a weight more crushing than all the problems of the world piled on one another. That mighty burden is the person's obligation to God. Romans chapter 1, chapter 2 tells us that everyone has it, but some are better at suppressing it than others. It includes an instant and lifelong duty to love God with every power of mind and soul, to obey Him perfectly, and to worship Him acceptably. And when the man's laboring conscience tells him that he has done none of these things, but has from childhood been guilty of foul revolt against the majesty in the heavens, then the inner pressure of self-accusation, conviction, may become too heavy to bear. But the gospel can lift this destroying burden from the mind. The gospel can give beauty for ashes and the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. But unless the weight of that burden is felt, unless the truth be known about who you are, the gospel can mean nothing to that man. And until he sees a vision of God high and lifted up, there will be no woe and no burden. Low views of God destroy the gospel for all who hold them. Among the sins to which the human heart is prone, hardly any other is more hateful to God than idolatry. The idolatrous substitutes for the true God one made after his own likeness, made after man's own likeness. Always this God will conform to the image of the one who created it, and will be base or pure or cruel or kind, according to the moral state of the mind from which it emerges. So let us beware lest we in our pride accept the erroneous notion that idolatry consists only in kneeling before visible objects of adoration, and that civilized peoples are therefore free from it. No, idolatry is also found in the formless, like the internet. The essence of idolatry is the entertainment of thoughts about God that are unworthy of Him. It begins in the mind. It may be present where no overt act of worship has taken place. Romans 1, when they knew God, Paul wrote, they glorified Him not as God, neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations. And their foolish heart was darkened. The series of degrading acts began in the mind. The idolater simply imagines things about God and acts as if they were true. Perverted notions about God soon rot the religion in which they appear. The first step down for any church is taken when it surrenders its high opinion of God. To believe that God is different from what He actually is heresy of the most insidious and deadly kind. We do the greatest service to the next generation of Christians by passing on to them, undimmed and undiminished, that noble concept of God which we received from our Christian fathers of generations past. This will prove of greater value to them than anything that art or science or the internet can devise. God bless you, my friends.
Well, that's a rather interesting position coming from a man on a crusade against the evils of technology.
I'm not against technology, Doctor. I'm against the men who deify it at the expense of human truth.
Armor of Truth. Live.
In the age of technocracy, scientism, and pop atheism,
Faith is resistance.
Nietzsche, of course, announced the death of God and called for the birth of the Übermensch, the Superman, who would take humanity to new heights and to create a new world order.
Find us at the Armor of Truth YouTube channel and log on armoroftruth.net.